People fight for all kinds of reasons, mostly because they want something. Some folks are really good at fighting in slick, underhanded, dirty ways. And some folks are even better at that kind of underhanded fighting while knowing how to manage your impression of them while looking good and also making you feel crazy if you suspect what they're up to.
Well, Dr. Simon, you have written that failing to see the aggression in the tactics of others is always how one gets manipulated. What led to this conclusion?
I was working with a lot of individuals who were experiencing what we now call very commonly the gaslighting effect. When I first started doing seminars and workshops, and when I started gathering clinical data and thinking about writing the first book in sheep's clothing, I had encountered a number of people who had been in relationships where their gut was telling them one thing about what their partner was up to, but they couldn't objectively prove it. And this made them feel crazy. And to make a long story short, when I described in the opening chapters of my first book, in sheep's clothing, when I described that crazy making feeling, I mean, basically the internet blew up.
Mm.
I started getting emails like crazy, people saying, yes, yes, we've been saying this to our therapist the whole time, but they didn't seem to get it. Um, and what I came to appreciate is that psychology had largely ignored the fact that people do a lot more fighting in life than they do running. Most of classical psychology is steeped in fear and insecurity and deals with people's anxieties and their inner conflicts, but mostly their fears and insecurities. And the assumption was always within the classical frameworks, the assumption was that people only aggress, they only fight when they feel threatened in some way. And I attended a forensic workshop actually very early in my career that completely reoriented me.
Mm.
It was a really powerful workshop with prime examples. And then I started looking, I started observing, and I thought, oh my goodness, people fight for all kinds of reasons. And not just because they're afraid of something, mostly because they want something. And some folks are really good at fighting in slick, underhanded, kind of dirty ways. And some folks are even better at that kind of underhanded fighting while knowing how to manage your impression of them while looking good and also making you feel crazy if you suspect what they're up to. And that was basically the start of my career.
Yes, and this type of underhanded fighting and leaving people with this gaslighting effect, as you call it, and sort of an umbrella you've used, the covert aggression.
Yes.
How is it possible that so many people can use these tactics and yet they're so similar? How do they all end up? It seems to be the same story over and over again.
Yes. Well, yeah, all of the tactics that I describe in all my writings and in all five books, they uh, they all have the same effect. They're designed to throw you internally on the defensive. And at the same time, the person looks like they're doing anything but trying to gain the advantage over you. But your gut knows better. People don't pay attention to their gut. They don't trust it because many times it's hard to objectively prove it. For example, I've countless cases of, say, for example, infidelity within a marriage. And then the aggrieved partner is wary of those texts that come in. They're wary of folks hiding the phone or other ways to kind of double check and make sure that they really are remorseful and it's not going to happen again. And when the guilty party throws a tactic at you like, well, I suppose you're never going to have any trust anymore. What can a person do? What do I have to do? And they act like they're the victim They act like you're unreasonable, and they do it with such intensity and with such apparent conviction. You start to think, well, maybe I really have no right to feel the way I do. Maybe they are actually feeling persecuted, et cetera, et cetera. Instead of regarding the tactic for just what it is, a tactic to keep you in the one down position. If they had any real intention of setting things right, making amends, they'd be doing all they could to restore trust.
Hmm. Yeah, you mentioned the one down position, and one thing that I'm particularly interested in that's come up a lot on the show lately is dealing with persons with narcissistic personality disorder. I know you trained under Theodore Millon and that you have expertise in personality disorders. With this type of manipulation, the narcissist often has a group, a fan club. How can you spot it when there is a collective who's bought in?
Yeah. Well, let's, though, as a student myself in the Milanian school, one thing we need to establish right from the outset, narcissism is not a one size fits all phenomenon.
Mhm.
It comes in many shapes and sizes, and some of the shapes and sizes are a little bit more benign than others. When I was first writing about this, especially in my book Character Disturbance, I observed that there were two very, very different kinds of narcissism. And at the time, there was no research to back that up. But I knew what I was seeing, two very different types. And I gave them labels that are not in use today. But today we know that there are two very, very different types with very different kinds of ideologies. And even within those two major different types, there are many subtypes. Some narcissists have a real capacity for charm
Mm.
and for what we call positive impression management and for endearing folks. They're expert seducers. They know how to get their amen choir going or their amen corner going. And many times that really enhances the crazy making effect that their relationship partners or other victims feel because they feel isolated and alone and they think, why do so many people like this person?
Mm.
When I have had firsthand experience and I know what they're really like, and they're not really like they present themselves, but other people are quite convinced, that makes you feel even worse.
Yeah. So when that happens, in your book In Sheep's Clothing, there seems to be a lot of examples of dynamics that are relatively few people. Three people, a family, something like that. When you see it in this group setting, how do you spot it or even point it out to others?
Boy, that's a really hard question to answer in our day and time because
Mm.
narcissism of one variety or another, or one degree of intensity or another, is pretty rampant.
Hmm.
So it's really, you know, this is the saddest thing, I think. We become so desensitized to it that even the most egregious displays of it don't seem to unnerve us as much as they would have in prior decades. I mean, we've witnessed on the big stages displays of grandiosity, of demeaning manner, of haughtiness, of contempt. We've witnessed levels of that you would never have expected to see, and it's not only given a pass, but people have become uncomfortably used to it.
Hmm.
So calling out these things and responding appropriately and really highlighting the dynamic in a way that gives people pause is harder than ever.
Mm.
We have become desensitized. We're all too painfully used to it. And when someone finally starts getting a clue about about the about the sickness. And they, I'm a stickler for words, so that's not even the right word. That's not even the right word. The basically the sadness, the, the, the sorry state of affairs in what's going on with many people's character. When somebody tries to call that out or highlight it or bring it to light, most folks just can't see it, which makes them even more alone, feel even more alone.
Hmm. And in your book, In Sheep's Clothing, too, you mentioned that if you decide to confront this sort of behavior, you should be prepared for the consequences.
Absolutely.
Take steps to prepare yourself, find safety in numbers, things
Right.
like that. How does that work?
Yeah, it's all about taking the appropriate action to take care of yourself. It's all about truly loving yourself in the best way you can. You know, therapists and relationship partners make the same horrendous mistake when dealing with disturbed characters. They try as best as they can to get them to see what they're doing, and in the hopes that if they see not only what they're doing, but the negative impact, then maybe they will have enough care and concern and empathy to change their behavior. A waste of time and energy. And as anybody who has dragged their relationship partner in for therapy knows, you experience even more trauma many times in the counselor's office, trying to get them to see what you already see. um, so what I advocate in all my books is to take the appropriate action to take care of yourself. Trust your gut when somebody's trying to take advantage of you or exploit your generosity or your conscience and trying to gain advantage over you to manipulate and control you. Take steps. Don't red flag it. Don't say what you're going to do if, just do it. Just take care of yourself. And if need be, if the only reasonable strategy for the salvation of your sanity is to exit, then do so. And
Mhm.
don't worry about whether other people see it or get it or understand. Just take care of yourself.
Mhm. One thing that you did talk about, involving other people, is that there is safety in numbers. How can people go about that? Go about looking for those sort of allies?
Oh boy. And that's particularly important in the case of really abusive relationships where the
Hmm.
dominator or the controller has basically sent the message for a long time, and this is how trauma bonds develop, has basically sent the message for a long time that your greatest danger is when you say no, or
Yeah.
when you call it quits, or when you declare independence and try to look out for yourself, because they are hell bent on domination and control. So that the abuse victim knows that the most dangerous time is when they've had enough and they're not going to play the game anymore and they get out. And that's why if they don't have a solid support network, if they haven't built those relationships, if they haven't basically built a network of folks who are both capable of understanding and certainly caring, then they're really in a dangerous position. So there's nothing more important than building those relationships. And people don't have to understand it all. All you have to do is be you in building those relationships, and those who get you, and those who appreciate and value you will naturally rally to your support. And those who don't, or who don't appreciate you, or don't have the character to appreciate you, you're better off moving on
Hmm.
and finding somebody else.
Hmm. Yeah. And you had mentioned just taking action, being bold and decisive in that action. Now, standing your ground when you are going through, say, like a case of narcissistic abuse. You have the slot machine syndrome. You have learned helplessness that's happened through this process. How does a person overcome those internal barriers to move and be decisive?
Yeah. You mentioned the slot machine syndrome. Um, it taught me so much about how people in these kinds of relationships end up getting depressed. It's because they have their attention and their energy invested in things that they can't control.
Mm,
One of the things that skilled manipulative people are good at is getting you to pay so much attention to them and what they might do or what they might say or what action they might take in response to whatever. So you're constantly thinking about, well, if I do this, then what will they do? Or if I approach things in this way, what will be their response? That's not in your control. Where you have power is in the action that you take. And as soon as you divorce yourself from the anticipation of results, and as soon as you divorce yourself from all the imagined things and actions that the other person might do, in fact, as soon as you drop the misguided notion that you, in some way, by either compliance or in some other way, can actually control the other person's behavior. As soon as you drop that, you begin to become empowered. So the importance of taking action is twofold. One, you're wasting time and energy and you're just wasting your breath trying to get them to see what they already see. And secondly, you're empowered because where you have power is to take action. That's where you have power. And you're always in the one down position when your mind is focused on what will they do or
mm,
what will be the outcome of this.
mm,
That's inherently disempowering.
mm. Yeah, and you said trying to get them to see what they already know. I think you have a little rhyme about this. They
Yes, my little
see.
rhyming phrases in workshops, I say it's not that they don't see. There isn't anything you can say that they haven't been told 1,000 times before. They already see. The problem is they disagree. In other words, those standards of behavior, those principles that we would like them to live by, they get it. They've heard it a gazillion times. I promise you, they see. The problem is they disagree. They want their way or the highway. They
Mm,
see the road you'd like them to take. They prefer not to take it.
yeah.
So I say they see but disagree. And it's not so much that they're not aware. The bigger problem is they don't care.
Mm,
And the more aware they are and the less they care, the bigger problem you have within a relationship.
mhm. So if you're dealing with someone who doesn't care, who sees their behavior, uh, at the same time, you've been in their cult-like entourage or their fan club for a while, so you have fewer people to lean on. You're dealing with this own internal set of barriers, the learned helplessness, the slot machine syndrome, but you do find the way to get past that and try to move away. Now, these people, as you've written, covert aggressives believe, quote, anything in their way must be rendered incapable. So at this point, now their impression management is kicking in. Then there's a probability of a smear campaign because they don't want you to threaten their impression management.
Right. Right.
Um, what can you do to prepare yourself for a smear campaign?
Yeah. And that's why it's so important to cultivate the relationships on your own. They're likely to do that kind of thing, and you
Hmm.
can't control it.
Hmm.
So the where you have power is in letting people get to know you
Hmm.
and cultivating your own relationships. And as I mentioned earlier, those folks who see you but don't really appreciate you. In other words, when they get to know who you are in character and they don't have adequate appreciation for who you are, move on. Look for someone else. Build your own network because they are going to do whatever it takes to maintain an image. You know, it's a lot easier to work to look good than it is to do the work of being good. We are creatures of economy. We take the easiest path. We all do. It's kind of built into our architecture. And believe me, it is a lot easier, especially in our character impaired age. It's a lot easier to do all that it takes to look good as opposed to being good. So they'll do what they can to present a nice image and to cultivate a fan club. That's a lot easier work than acknowledging personal defects, acknowledging egregious behavior in the past, and doing the work that it takes to make of ourselves a more decent person. That kind of work defines love.
Hmm. Um, in sheep's clothing, you wrote about an element that seems to play into this trying to go out and make your own relationships. On page 135, you mentioned that along with the smearing things, that someone could start a reality and history restructuring campaign among the people around them. That was an
Yes.
idea I'd never come across before, but it's actually disturbing. What is that? How does it work?
Well, a famous psychologist said that for these really grandiose narcissists, thinking makes it so. In other words, what they say is true is true. Whatever they say is real. And all you really have to do, this is really an interesting phenomenon. All you really have to do is to tell the lie over and over again.
Yeah.
And the more conviction you have behind it, and it makes any other person wonder, do they really believe what they're saying? Do they really believe this reality they're trying to construct? Most of the time, no. What's important is that you believe it. And so they'll keep at it until they see some capitulation on other people's part.
Hmm.
You just keep telling the same old lies. You just keep painting the same picture, the same reality. And then after a time, it becomes reality for some people, for
Hmm.
people who have uh, lost basically the strength to question and to think for themselves.
Yeah. So to boil this down, then in a case of narcissistic abuse, the people who are being abused, their reality test can eventually be broken by a narcissist. They can be isolated from other people who might help them test reality. And then you're saying if that person, that narcissist, just keeps repeating the lie, that eventually it becomes reality within the group. Is that roughly
Within
how
the
it works?
circle. Yeah, yes, within the circle of those folks who are mesmerized.
Hmm.
Narcissists are good at that too. Many narcissists, the ones that are good, what we now call impression managers, um, they're good at mesmerizing.
Hmm.
They will have you thinking that they either have something or know something that most people don't.
Hmm.
And if it were not easy to do that, if the tactics basically did not work, then no one would use them.
Hmm.
They do work. And folks who are determined to dominate learn early on in life what vulnerabilities caring people have. You can divide you can divide into two groups essentially. It's a bit of an oversimplification, but it still has merit. The folks that care too much versus the folks that care not too much. You can divide them into those two groups. And the folks that care not too much are pleased as punch that the other group cares and maybe cares too much because they'll use that sensitivity. They'll use that giving the benefit of the doubt to their advantage. It's a game for them. It's a game of how do I within any relationship rise to the top, look good without being good, and maintain some sense of control at the same time. And the best way to do it is to play on the good nature of other people.
Mm. So the darker reality here is that the conscience of people is in ways of vulnerability to these people.
That's exactly right.
Hmm.
I said you could divide people into two groups. The other way you can do it, aside from the dimension of caring, is there are those folks that we have classically called neurotic who have overactive conscience, too much conscience, as Scott Peck says, and those folks who don't have enough conscience,
Hmm.
nothing to hold them back. Um, and we used to think that everybody had a conscience, and that because everybody had a conscience, folks like narcissists and folks like the aggressors that I outline in all my books, we thought that they just had these unconscious defense mechanisms that help prevent them from feeling guilty or help prevent them from feeling shame, et cetera, et cetera. When we now know, and what I learned early on in my research and started writing about, and when I first started writing about it, by the way, and giving workshops on it, many of the attendees, professionals at the workshops, were not happy. Some
Hmm.
even walked out
Yeah.
because they didn't want to hear that some folks just don't have the conscience to start with.
Hmm.
They don't really need any internal defense mechanisms because they're not perturbed. Uh, they just don't have that inner voice, and especially they don't have that allegiance to that inner voice that would keep them from exploiting and in other ways abusing people, taking advantage of people.
Yeah, the journey into this topic, I think for a lot of people can be disheartening to kind of come to that realization. I can see why professionals would resist. One thing that you mentioned early in our discussion, and I think is coming back around, is this gaslighting effect, this being mesmerized. I've heard people talk about being sort of under the spell of the
Hmm.
narcissist. Um,
Yes.
how can we recognize that, or maybe see it in others? Are there telltale signs?
Oh, yes. Within us all, there's the desire to believe.
Yeah.
We want to believe that a really wholesome relationship is possible, even in this character disturbed age. And so when somebody is really good at the art of positive impression management, has those mesmerizing skills, how we know it is when somebody is really falling and falling hard, when they are, well, we don't use the word so much anymore in the English language, but when they are truly enamored,
Hmm.
when all of a sudden it's seeming like somebody hung the moon, basically.
Mm.
In the old days, uh, in days past, when that was happening, and some family member, some loving family member, saw someone coming under the spell, they would gently and lovingly advise the person, okay, yeah, we see what's happening here. We're not going to do battle with you on this because if you're falling under a spell, to challenge you on it is probably not going to be very effective. You're probably going to just dig in your heels and you're going to be even more swayed. But we do urge you to check things out, to look at the history. How many other relationships have there been? How many persons before thought this person hung the moon and then found out later that it was a disaster? Check things out. Do the best you can to be a little bit more objective um, before you give your heart away.
Mm. So to counter that strategy, perhaps would a narcissist want to, do they set up shop? Do they kind of, burn a social circle and then they come into a new sphere and then try to build up a new fan club and go from there to are they looking to kind of um, compartmentalize these experiences so that people don't catch on, or do they have to kind of push away the past?
Hmm. It varies. I mean, there are no hard and fast rules, and like I
Hmm.
mentioned earlier, we're falling into a trap these days. We
Okay.
really are. I constantly see on the internet narcissist this and narcissist that,
Yeah.
like it's a unidimensional phenomenon. It's not. I
Mm.
can't say that enough.
Mm.
Neither character disturbance as a broad category, nor narcissism as a phenomenon is a unidimensional one. It matters what type. The ideologies are different, the backgrounds are different, the MOs are different, the modus operandi. Grandiose narcissists, let me start first with the more vulnerable compensatory types. The type for whom it might actually be true that underneath it all, they have a very shaky sense of self, that underneath it all, they're a bit insecure. And maybe that comes out of a tough background in which there wasn't enough affirmation and there wasn't enough support. That kind of narcissism is a very, very different animal
Mm.
than the narcissism that comes from being indulged, told you're special, basically raised to believe that anything goes, all that matters is that you win, et cetera, et cetera. That kind of animal coming out of that kind of environment, and also by nature lacking in empathy, that kind of narcissist is a very different creature, very different.
Mm.
And we have to stop talking about narcissism like it's one thing. It's
Mhm.
not.
Mhm. Yeah, I really admire how you are precise about terms. That's something I've seen in other interviews with you as well. You like to get those dialed in. And in the first edition of Sheep's Clothing, you didn't use the term gaslighting, if I understand correctly.
That's
It's now
correct.
something you've seen as sort of a meta level of the tactics. Just
Well,
in
well,
general,
we
how?
didn't have a commonly accepted label then.
Mm,
I knew the crazy making behavior I was seeing, and
mhm.
as I mentioned before, all I had to do was describe it for my email box to just blow
Yeah.
up.
Yeah.
So, I mean, people could identify with what I was describing, even though we weren't using that name very commonly back then. Some folks were, but it wasn't a generally accepted term. So, yeah, now we know, and we more universally use the term. But I kind of got off track mentally there. What was the second part of your question again?
Well, just so knowing this about gaslighting, could you describe it a little more and how it is a meta level of the tactics that you do lay out in your book?
Right. Well, a manipulator can set out mainly to just make you feel crazy.
Mm.
The movie that people remember is actually an adaptation of a stage play that went nowhere. But the movie with Charles Boyer and Ingrid Bergman had an impact, and it was about this schemer's plan to gain control of the resources of this estate by making the owner, whom he married, uh, think that she was crazy, and did all these shenanigans to make her think that she was seeing things that she wasn't seeing and experiencing things that she wasn't seeing. And it was all designed basically to manipulate her. And A person can set out to just create that effect, but more often the effect comes from the use of all the tactics that I describe in the book, where the person casts themselves as a victim when you're the actual victim, to make you see them that way and make you doubt that you are actually being victimized, which your gut tells you are. That induces the crazy making feeling. So it's the tactics themselves usually that induce the crazy making feeling that we call gaslighting. And a few things will enhance it. If the person acts with conviction, when they look dead serious, when they get really intense about it, when they act righteously indignant that you should question what they're doing or what their motivation is. All that kind of intensity and seeming resoluteness and self-assuredness makes you doubt even more. It increases the gaslighting effect.
Mhm. Yeah, it seems that stacking tactics is the most powerful way to make a move in this manipulation sphere. And talking back to smear campaigns too, I was thinking about it. It can stack so many so fast. You can be deliberately vague, which is, as you pointed out, essentially a form of lying and a form of evasion. It can divert from the abuse that happens. It's covert intimidation. It can create shaming. You can play the victim while vilifying the victim. You can play the servant by feeling like you have to, by presenting it as though you have to get the word out.
Right,
You're just helping people. You just want people to know how bad this person is. It's
right,
scapegoating, and then of course it's gaslighting, and it's the reality and history restructuring, all stacked so fast. It seems a
right.
devastating thing. Have you seen anything that works effectively against the smear campaign?
Well, the thing that really works is keeping your power where it actually lies, and that is your behavior.
Hmm.
You don't have the power to either control the manipulator's behavior or the impact that they might likely have on the others that they're trying to bring into the smear campaign and to bring into their camp. You have the power to display who you are. And if you start playing their game,
Mm.
if you start trying to justify yourself and highlight the truth, you're only playing their game. You really just need to let people know who you are. And frankly, if they don't appreciate what they see firsthand, you let people know who you are, not by telling them who you are. That's cheap. By showing them who you are. And you'll know who your friends are by whether or not they appreciate that. If they get to know you, really get to know you, and don't appreciate your goodness or your nature, then, some people would say, well, the hell with them. Because they're not going to be your friends. How you really empower yourself is by displaying yourself, displaying your character, and cultivating that association with folks who appreciate who you really are.
Yes, this reminds me of something you've written as sort of the fundamental rule, and I'm going to paraphrase it here, but it's don't be swayed by tactics. The manipulator is fighting for something. Respond solely on the basis of your legitimate wants and needs. Don't react instinctively, and take your own independent, assertive stand.
Right. That's where you
Roughly
have
the
power.
fundamental rule.
You just assert yourself.
Hmm.
That's where you have power. It's just that simple. Most folks have been conditioned to think in terms of, but what if I do this and this happens? Or what will happen if I do that? It's that external thinking that will kill you every time. I like to tell people very bluntly, first of all, the outcome is none of your business, and you can't control it anyway.
Yeah.
And it was your manipulator who got you in the first place into thinking in those terms. You just do what you know in your heart is the right thing to do, and you just keep doing it.
Mm.
That's the secret to personal power.
Wow.
Those that appreciate the testament you're making with that kind of behavioral integrity are going to be your friends.
Mm.
And those that don't, you're very well without them.
Yeah.
You're better off without them.
Mm. Wow. Knowing all this, at the same time, we do want to recognize tactics. That's one of the key points in I think in your work. What do we do when we recognize the tactics?
Ah, excellent. We don't respond to the tactics, but we do recognize them. And the first thing we do is dismiss them as tactics.
Mm.
The greatest empowerment is realizing and just accepting the fact that people fight.
Mm.
We do far more fighting in everyday life, whether it's jockeying for that parking space or looking for that place in line at the grocery store. We 99.99% of life is fighting, and psychology has been an abysmal failure in not paying attention to that. That's what we do.
Mm,
Now, how we fight, why we fight, the manner in which we fight. Some things are worth fighting for.
mm,
And when we fight for principle, for a decent principle, and when we fight with care and concern not to needlessly harm, and when we fight to construct, to build something positive as opposed to destroy, that's the best human behavior there is. We call it assertiveness.
mm,
So the first thing we do is we dismiss the tactics as
mhm,
just what they are. We say, okay, so and so is just fighting once again for what they want, for the position of dominance in this relationship. I see it. I'm not going to counter it. I'm just not going to be swayed by it. I say yes or no. I say whether I do or don't. They don't. They're going to throw their tactics. They're going to try every way possible to get me to capitulate. That's fine. I see what they're doing. I make my decisions based on my principles. That's simple.
So we recognize the tactic, we dismiss it as a tactic, and then we return to our own goals. We can be assertive if we need to,
Exactly.
and we rest in our personal power. What can we do to build our personal power for then making those moves forward, being assertive as we need to?
Practice, practice, practice. Practice ignoring the tactics. Practice setting personal goals. Practice investing your energy where you have power, which means ignoring people, places, and things you can't control anyway, and investing your time and energy in what you need. And spending some time with yourself to get an internal handle on what it is that you are looking for or what it is you want in your life, and then taking some steps to get it. And it's incremental. It's step by step. Practice, practice, practice. Baby steps sometimes. And here's the most important thing because, and people think it's trite. When I give this, I do consultations with people all over the world. And when I give this advice, at first they think it's trite, but they come to realize it's power later. No new learning takes place without reinforcement,
Hmm.
period. You don't start doing differently, even with repeated practice, unless there's reinforcement. And sometimes the external reinforcement doesn't come for a while. The rewards of doing differently don't appear right away. So guess who has to deliver the reinforcement? You do. You give yourself that internal validation, that internal atta girl or atta boy. You say, you know what? I know I just did the better thing just
Hmm.
now. Without that reinforcement, new habits don't take hold.
Hmm.
So even though it sounds trite, when you take that alternative action, you better reinforce it. You
Hmm.
better say to yourself, okay, this is sure better than falling into that same old trap.
Yeah. Yeah, you said it sounds trite. It also seems to sound sort of poetic if you think of folks who have been through something like narcissistic abuse, where they become so dependent on the abuser, and they're
Yes,
always looking to them, and the abuser seems to be sort of dangling trinkets to keep you going. But instead to find that in yourself, to be able to reward yourself as an alternative, it just sounds excellent.
thank you.
Yeah. What do you make of a general philosophy about self-esteem with narcissism? And this is really a question that comes from my last guest. His name is Dr. Peter Salerno, and he wonders, I'm paraphrasing, what do you make of the idea that pathological narcissists struggle with self-esteem?
Uh, Once again, we are talking about narcissism like it's a unipolar phenomenon.
Hmm.
It depends on what type.
Hmm.
Okay. And even within the two major types, there are subtypes. Some compensatory types are struggling with underlying deficiencies in self esteem, but it is not the major problem today. We have far more of the other types of narcissists today. And when you chronically inflate your abilities, when you chronically inflate your accomplishments, when you chronically assert that you're better than anyone else and better than you actually are, it's impossible to develop a solid, healthy, meaningful, balanced sense of self-worth. So it doesn't work in the direction that most of these folks are saying. It works exactly the opposite. The reason, if there is any underlying deficiency in self concept, it's because of the chronic overplaying of one's worth. It's
And
not compensatory.
mhm,
And and also in some folks with these inflated egos, like I said, it depends on type. In some folks, they have been given messages their whole life about how much better they are,
mhm,
how much better their family is than other pathetic families. There's other things that can inflate self esteem. Some people equate their gifts with their worth. And in my books, as you know, especially in Sheep's Clothing and in Character Disturbance, I distinguish between self esteem and self respect. Our words have to mean things, and they actually do. You know, we get the word esteem from the Latin estimare, which means to basically make a guess,
mhm.
an estimate. We get the
Oh,
word estimate from that about what you have going for you. And folks who have ample natural gifts get to feel pretty, they get the feeling an intuitive sense about what they have going for them, but they don't give the credit where the credit is due. They don't give nature or a higher power the credit for the gift. They own it, and they instantly think they're special. Plus, they may have been told how special they are. Self respect, we get the word respect, the Latin spectere, we get glasses from it. We call these spectacles, right? Because spectere in Latin is to look, and to re look or to review what you've done with what you've been given is a whole different thing. So there are a lot of narcissistic individuals of one type or another who are inflated in their self esteem but have absolutely no cause for self respect because they've never honored the giver of the gifts and they've never used those gifts for any meaningful or constructive purpose other than their own aggrandizement.
mhm,
So they have no cause really for self respect. That's a whole different dimension. We could spend a whole program on that
mhm.
and why some of these notions I like in workshops. I've likened them to the creatures in the dark in the grade B horror movies. You know those old
Yeah.
movies that you always used to watch at the drive-in, the grade B movies where the monster you think you've killed it, but then it comes back. You know the creature just never dies, or you're waiting for the reinstallment in the next follow-up movie where you know where the creature wasn't killed at all. Some of these notions that we have had about what underlies this behavior, they're like the creature in the grade B horror movies. They won't die despite all the evidence that we're wrong.
Mhm,
You know that wasn't until a few decades ago that things that people of my generation in professional training schools, whether it be medicine, psychiatry, social work, psychology, we were still being taught things like autism probably had its origins in coldness
mhm,
from the mother during the nurturing phase of development.
mhm,
Cold mothers nursing their infants at the breast produced autistic children. People would laugh you out of the room today. And yet, similar misguided notions from a different era about what makes people tick persist.
Mhm.
People do what they think pays off.
Mhm.
Behavior is governed by its consequences or its apparent consequences. And when people think that their way of being and their way of acting is working, at least bringing them what they value, it appears to be working. It may not work based on our set of principles. We may say, well, don't they see this or that? They don't care about this or that. They're getting what they want out of it. They're happy with their way of seeing and doing things because it's getting them what they want.
Mhm.
Why should they change it?
That is a challenge. And you've written about how it's important to confront that behavior too. But that takes courage to stand your ground. How can people who are, in these direct relationships, but maybe they see a place to redeem the relationship, but it's going to require the courage to stand the ground. How can people find the strength to do that?
Yeah. Um, can we come back to that? You may have to even think the question because I forgot a really important point that I
Sure.
wanted to make about that other thing we were just talking about. More people have been uh, have gotten themselves stuck and wasted too much time getting out of abusive relationships because of those old paradigms.
Hmm.
If we're always, we were taught to look for the wound. We were taught to look for the hurt
Yeah.
underneath the bad behavior. In the thinking that if I could just address that her, if I really believe that the reason he or she is acting that way is because they weren't valued enough, or because they say that, because they describe a history that says this or that, then I think I can fix it. If I just, with just enough love and enough attendance to this, I can fix this, as opposed to focusing on the behavior. I just wanted to get that in. It's so important. Our paradigms actually helped victims stay stuck
Hmm.
in toxic relationships
Mhm.
because we bought into those paradigms. And those paradigms themselves have some value. People think I'm against the classical paradigms. My wife and I, we've done analysis.
Hmm.
So we see great value in all of that. We're good old neurotics. I hope we're not character disordered. So some of those great old metaphors really apply,
Mhm.
but sometimes they don't. And we need to stop overgeneralizing. And in the case of the kinds of narcissism we're seeing today, the major kinds of narcissism that we're seeing today, many of our notions about what underlies it are misguided and are incorrect and are actually doing damage because they get potential victims and existing victims to see things the wrong way and maybe stay stuck in a toxic relationship.
Mhm. So if someone does see a relationship as one worth staying in, but they are recognizing the manipulative behavior, the tactics that you've laid out, um, what can a person do to find the courage to stand their ground? Because you've written that confronting the behavior is your best bet for getting change.
If you're confronting the behavior with the notion that if I confront it strong enough, maybe they'll change it, you could still be getting yourself into big trouble. You want to confront it directly. You want to recognize what's going on, recognize its nature. But then what you really want to do is just take some action to take care of yourself. And how you reinforce that pattern, as I said earlier, is through practice. You start small. Sometimes it can be as simple as just leaving the room.
Mm.
Sometimes it can be just as simple as doing what they really like to do, which is tuning out. If you're confronting something they'd rather not hear about, they just go to Pluto.
Yeah.
They just tune you out. La 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 la. You can do the same thing. So sometimes it has to start small. with the actions you take in your own best interest. But if you keep your attention focused not so much on what they're doing and the need to confront it, just recognize people fight. They always want what they want. They find ways to try and get it. You decide, you decide whether you're going along.
Hmm. I'm curious, does the victimization happen in sort of the reverse of this? Is it often small things that seem to be a slippery slope? You give in to the abuser a little bit and a little more, and it accelerates from there,
Oh
or is
my
it kind of
goodness.
right from the bat?
Oh, good. Absolutely. Yes. Children learn this early.
Hmm.
There's the old saying about give them an inch and they'll take a mile.
Yeah.
Well, they look for those inches first. This is, it is so much a part of our life. And I know I sound like a broken record here, but this is the illuminating factor. The illuminating factor has to do with divorcing ourselves from that old paradigm that says that everybody's wounded and struggling with insecurities and unmet needs and blah, 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 blah. We are fighters, first and foremost. And some people are very unprincipled.
Hmm.
They're unscrupulous fighters, underhanded fighters sometimes, using wile and using beguiling, using seduction, using ego massage, using all kinds of things to get what they want.
Hmm.
You need to do your character homework, especially today, because we're in a sea of character impairment, the likes of which we've not seen. So much so that even when the most horrendous displays of it are right in front of our face, we're not as appalled as we used to be. We not only give it a pass, but some of the most despicable characters are winning, are winning big time in life.
So if it is this slippery slope, what are the micro tactics, those things that we can watch for very early on with someone?
Mm. Does he or she always have to be right?
Mm,
Do I always have to be wrong? Do they have an answer for everything?
mm,
Um, did they really take my comment or my concern with any real, uh, did they attach any real value to it?
mm,
They did hear me, but did they really care what I had
mhm.
to say about what they just said or did and the impact that it had on me? The evidence is in the behavior. That's the other thing we need to pay attention to is the behavior. I talk a lot in my articles online and in all five of my books about the difference between regret, remorse, and contrition.
Mm,
These are the three probably best indicators of integrity of character in a relationship partner. Because, we all do dumb stuff. We all do things we shouldn't do. But if a person has regret, it shows up in their concern over what it cost them. That's actually what the word regret means. It has to do with a thing you do or say that has a consequence that affects you negatively. So you have regret because it costs you something. Remorse has to do with the injury inflicted on somebody else and having at least some degree of empathy for the pain you caused. Contrition goes the step further. It means something too. Words have to mean something,
mhm,
and I'm a stickler, as you know, for the words. It comes from the Latin contritus, which means the crushing of spirit.
mm,
It means that my heart aches because of the ache that I know I caused in your heart. And when my heart is aching because of the ache I caused you. The only way to rid myself of the ache in my own heart is to mend the ache in your heart. And that's how you know you got somebody worth being with because they don't they don't turn it on you and they don't cast you as unreasonable. They work to repair the damage, whatever it was. There's no pride involved. We all screw up.
Mhm. Yeah. Now, I have a question. I imagine you're going to say it takes small steps to do it, but I'm wondering how do you build that in yourself if you want to be that kind of person for the people around you?
Yeah. Well, that is what my current my latest book is all about,
Hmm.
Essentials for the Journey.
Hmm.
In my book Character Disturbance, I outlined what I call the 10 commandments of character. These are the steps that we need to take, just as you were asking, the various steps we need to take to strengthen and become the best that we can be, to strengthen our moral character, to solidify the internalization of our values, and to be the best that we can possibly be. There are 10 commandments, I call them, of character. And in my book, Essentials for the Journey, I outline them and how we go about the process of nurturing those things, how we go about the process of building integrity. Um, so I really hope that it catches on like the first book did. The first book became an international phenomenon, and I never anticipated that at all. It's been the greatest gift of my
Yeah.
life. It makes me feel like I did at least something worthwhile. Um, but I really, my heart is in this latest book.
Hmm.
And I've got a revision of In Sheep's Clothing under development because it'll be on the bestseller list for a total of 30 years this next September, not this year, but next September, 30 years.
Wow, it's incredible.
I know. It's kind of mind-boggling. So it needs updating a
Mhm.
lot, because a lot has changed with regard to terminology that we use, colloquialisms and stuff like that. Maybe even some of the examples in it. So I'm reworking it presently, and so there'll be a new edition of that. But I'm also working on some smaller little kind of pocket books, just food for thought books,
Mhm.
and they will amplify uh, some of the principles I outlined in Essentials for the Journey.
Excellent. Well, Dr. Simon, before we get to my last topic, we'll put links to those books down in the description. And also, where should people look for you online?
Well, I have a website, drgeorgesimon.com. That's DRGEORGESIMON.com. And I have hundreds of free blog articles there for folks that don't want to purchase books or in circumstances where they need an immediate answer. You can research all kinds of topics, and there are just literally hundreds of articles there, um, free for the taking. You can also contact me through the blog. There's a contact feature for people. Like I said, I do consultations all over the globe, and people can contact me and share with me their story or ask a question or request some individual time. And then there's my YouTube channel, which you can easily find by Googling.
Yeah, we'll put links to that in the description for people to check out. And Dr. Simon, my final topic is healing. What is healing from manipulative relationships, abuse, the gaslighting effect really look like, and how do we get there?
Wow. Boy, I mean, we could do another show on that. But
Sign me up.
I guess the long and the short of it is reclaiming personal power.
Mhm.
Once you have your energy divested from all the sick dynamics that an abusive or toxic relationship partner had you invested in. Once your energy is withdrawn to that, and it's invested in your own well-being, the healing is, I'm not going to say it's automatic because it doesn't come necessarily right away, but you get your energy back.
Mhm.
You develop some hope once again. You start to see the world differently. It starts to look a little brighter. You recognize that the world is full of some dysfunction, but you don't have to be a part of it. The world has always been full of some dysfunction. We would have a paradise if it weren't. But that doesn't mean you have to be enslaved by it or trapped by it. And that doesn't mean you have to play along either. Once you get really, really used to putting your attention and your focus and directing your energy where you have power, which is your own well being, and once you divorce yourself from the expectation of outcome and just really commit yourself to doing what your heart tells you is right, in time, I promise everything becomes different in time,
Beautiful.
when it's time.
Well, Dr. George K. Simon Jr., thank you so much for that message and for joining me for this interview. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was a pleasure being with you today.
To help raise awareness about narcissistic abuse, please share this video. It helps a lot.